Back. Let's bracketology show aptly named Fielding the 68. We are, of course, powered by Bet Rivers. I am Jim Root from the Three Man Weave and Best Bets. You might know me from there, but I'm unimportant today because we are joined by two cornucopias of bracketology knowledge. Heat Check's Lukas Harkins, Bracketeer.org's Rocco Miller. We might only scratch the surface today because these guys know just about everything you could possibly know about brackets, but rest assured, any question you have, any potential factoid, any historical data point, these guys have it covered. They are living in the weeds of that all the way until Selection Sunday. Thrilled to have them here. Fellas, we're going to jump right in. Not even going to say hi, just going to give you a question right off the bat. I asked this a little bit last year, but I want to kind of bring it again for this year for new viewers, any potential new audience we have. I want to ask about the eye test and how much it matters to you. Rocco, you are well known as a world traveler. You go to every single game possible. How much do you, A, use the eye test, or B, try to at least mimic what the committee uses? Because they bring it up. They mention it. Eye test matters to them at some point or in some way. How much does it matter to you when you're putting together your projections?
Yeah, Jim, that's a great question. I think there's value in it in terms of being able to see as many teams live as you can. I know the way they break up the committee is somewhat regional. It used to be completely regional. Now I think each member has like 4 or 5 leagues, usually one power league and 2 or 3 mid-major, low-major type leagues. And so, fortunately for me, I try not to let it impact the process too much because the whole art of bracketology, being on the outside looking in the room, not in the room itself, is more of an art and science, Jim, because we're basically playing a guessing game where there's 12 people having all these different discussions, going through a process. But fortunately, I've been doing this long enough where I've served on multiple different mock selection committees. And being a part of that process really helps a ton because you get to see how the order of things go, how you vote for teams. You go right down the board. You know, we have what's called a first ballot, which is the first 32 teams picked off the board before you start doing any of the bubble work. Then there's a whole, seeding process, scrubbing process, and placement into the bracket process. So I think when people see like my bracket or Field of 68's bracket, they think we're intentionally making these matchups. And sometimes it just works out that way. I mean, there's just so many great storylines in the sport that that just is part of the deal. And I think just to answer your larger question, it's like, you go through the process and you get to a point where maybe every once in a while the eye test matters, but it's very rare from what I find.
Lukas, you're always, clued in with Butler, your Butler insider for anyone not super familiar with your work. So we don't have, you and me, we don't have time to go to every game like Rocco does. But I know you watch a ton of basketball. You write about it from all different angles at Heat Check. What about you? Does eye test factor into the way you work through this process?
Not too much for me. I think overall it comes down to what you can see and what you can't see. I mean, we can't see every game. Every game is treated differently too. I mean, if I see a team 5 times, I could miss the one game that's a huge standout performance that changes the way things are coming. And I think that also the way the eye test operates over the course of the season, what do you really want to prioritize? Do you want to prioritize what a team looks like in mid-February or what a team looks like in mid-November? It changes things. So I try to leave the eye test mostly out of things from my standpoint, partially because I'm not the same talent evaluator or basketball evaluator that the guys at the committee are. I don't know how they're going to see a team compared to how I see a team. And with that, I have to stick to the more objective things that you can find in terms of the metrics that they use and rating systems that they have to come up with the closest resume comparison.
Yeah, that's one thing I think both of you do a terrific job of. I would go into this every year fresh, like, oh, I'm going to try to figure out who put these teams in order, 68. But you guys are always pulling examples from the past. And I think that is a really underrated ability to be able to do just off the top of your heads, and important to have that frame of reference as you go through making all this bracketology decisions that we have to do through a field of 68. But we're going to get started. Let's get into the bracket as it stands today, Friday, January 27th. We will start at the top. It's easiest to do. And hey, the selection show starts there too. So why shouldn't we start with 1 seeds? Teams at the top of the bracket, at the head of their region. I guess we'll just go to one of you first here and get 1 seeds. We'll debate them, get the other ones 1 seeds. And then we'll, of course, look at the consensus bracket, what we all came up with as a group, and see if we all agreed. We'll start with Lukas here. Who are your 4 1 seeds as it stands today? And who are you, I guess, least confident in being on that line?
So the second question is actually pretty easy for me.
Okay.
My one seeds coming into this today are Purdue, Alabama, Houston, and Arizona. And Arizona is definitely one I'm least confident in at this point. I think that you can make an argument for kind of anyone, I think, on the 2 line for me, which is Texas, UCLA, Tennessee, or Kansas. Any of those teams have an argument to be over Arizona at this point. I gave Arizona the edge because it has 5 quad 1A wins, which is a huge boost in terms of their top quality victories. That's my edge for Arizona. But I think that definitely the first 3 feel pretty comfortable on the 1 line if the bracket was today, and the 4th spot's more up for grabs.
All right, Rocco, that's where he stands. Are you in the same boat, or are you kind of in a different wavelength on that final that 4th 1 seed?
Yeah, Jim, I think you could consider me in the same boat just in terms of the 4 teams, right? So I've got the same 4. I went ahead and put Arizona 3rd in the pecking order, mainly because a couple of reasons. Arizona leads the nation in what we call, what I call elite wins, but what most people call quad 1A wins. I've had a lot of names from over the years, elite wins, super wins, but it's basically where you chop quad 1 in half and you're taking the upper half of quad 1. They've done that 5 times. Those are pretty significant. They've also got 6 wins against the field. A lot of the teams are being compared against on the 2 line, and even Houston themselves have 4 or less, except for Kansas. So that's a really nice part of what Arizona's doing. They're also looking very strong in each of the quadrant breakdowns. 7 total quad 1 wins, 9 when you get into quad 2. So overall, Arizona, despite the fact that I get the biggest critic of Arizona, it's the 3 blowout losses, all 3 against teams outside of the field. To me, that's a tough pill to swallow. But I think the rest of it outweighs that, just based on the fact that we're comparing them to a Houston team that lost at home to Temple the other day. But Houston is able to make up for that, of course, with incredibly strong predictive metrics, as well as a road win at Virginia, which is a win on the road against what I call a protected seed, anybody in the top 16. And that to me is something that a team like a Tennessee is missing, a team like a Texas is missing, and obviously Kansas and Kansas State have their flaws of late. So I'm going with Arizona, Houston in that order.
All right. So a quick question on Houston, Lukas. Last show on Monday, they left Houston off the 1 line because they had just picked up that Q3 loss. They're the only team in consideration for a 1 seed that had a Q3 loss. But of course, they backed that up with a big road win at UCF. How much does something, an outlier like that, a Q3 loss, or Kansas's strength of schedule being number 1 in the country, or the elite wins that Arizona has, are there certain things when you look at a 1 seed's resume that matter more than, maybe it matters more for a bubble team, but for a 1 seed, I want to look at this factor. How does that debate process go in your head?
For me or for Rocco?
Lukas. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I think that there's an outlier you can pick out with just about everybody on the top line if you want to. You can find something to pick apart against everyone's resume. And if you can't, they're already a 1. If you can't find anything against them, they're going to be on the 1 line. So Houston, you can point to that quad 3 loss, but you can also point to them being number 1 in the net, number 1 in all 3 quality metrics across the board, KenPom, BPI, and Sagarin. And at that point, it's really hard to leave them out of the conversation. When you're the consensus number 1 across analytic projections, they're probably going to land on the 1 line. They also have more of what they kind of lacked last year. They're 9-1 in quads 1 and 2 this year. They've got 4 quad 1 wins. 2 of those quad 1A wins that Rocco mentioned earlier. I think that their resume is more rock solid throughout quadrant records than it was, maybe even just as much as last year. So I would put them in that mark because of that. I think you can find an outlier for everybody that's in that conversation.
Yeah, Houston was a tough team to seed last year because they were like top 5 in every predictive metric, but didn't have the wins to back it up. Rocco, who is closest to cracking that 1 line for you of that Texas, Kansas, Tennessee group? Who jumps out to you most?
I mean, Tennessee's the closest for me, just based on the fact that their numbers say they should be a 1 seed. It's just the biggest gaping hole for them is they don't have a road win against the field at all. They've got an unbelievable neutral win against Kansas, which was great in the Battle for Atlantis championship game. That means a lot. It's not the same as winning at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. A couple nice wins. USC is looking like a better win during that same event. Maryland was a nice neutral win. I think that was in New York City. But other than that, the Vols, they've got a neutral loss to Colorado. They just don't have that oomph on the road like Houston has. And to me, that's the biggest difference. I think when you compare Houston and Tennessee, Houston just barely nips them on almost every comparison, including the quad 1A category, where Houston has 2 of those wins and Tennessee just has 1. But otherwise, Tennessee, it's really hard to kind of naysay them because they're so dominant on defense. They're incredible when you watch most of their games. So we're really splitting hairs, but it is the difference between the number 1 line and the number 2 line today.
And just for anybody watching this thought's getting in their head, Tennessee's historical performance in the tournament does not matter in the 1 seed discussion, correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
in fact, if history repeats itself, we'll get a 16 over a 1. So
yeah, there we go. That'd be fun. We'd enjoy
not a
that.
bad problem to have. Not a bad problem to have.
All right, let's go from the top to, I guess, not quite the bottom, the bottom of the at-large discussion. So the kind of the lower middle of the bracket here, your 11 seeds, 12 seed range. We're going to talk bubble now. Teams that are hanging out just barely in or just barely out. This time we'll start with Rocco and your last 4 teams in. There are teams to mention from Monday that got close. USC had a big win. Ohio State dropped to 11-9. Curious to see how that landed them in your final 4 teams in the field.
Yeah, so just to comment quickly on those 2 teams specifically, USC's win after a full reevaluation overnight and early this morning. I've been up a lot of hours, believe me. USC climbed all the way up to a 9 seed for me from that win. It's just everything from like a 10 seed down to like first 4 out. It's about a group of 12 to 16 teams. There's not a lot separating them. So a win over UCLA, albeit on their home court, beating them by 14. It changed a lot for the Trojans. They were already in my last 4 in, whatever we're calling that, on Monday. So they just vaulted past a bunch of teams overnight, which was pretty impressive. Ohio State, on the other end, they're just in a situation. They're pretty far out for me. They're my 4th team out today. We'll get into that in a minute. But for the Buckeyes, it's just the losses outweigh the wins right now. You look at their first 2 quads, they're 4-8. And then you add a cherry on top with the loss to the Gophers. That's not even counting that loss. So for now, it's just a numbers game. If Ohio State goes out, I know they got Illinois coming up. They're going to have a bunch of big games in the Big Ten. Don't worry, Buckeye fans. Just go take care of your business. You'll be back in the mix. They're in a less precarious situation than a team in a lower division. And then, so for my last 4 in today, it has nothing to do with any of those teams. We're talking Wisconsin today, mainly because, Wisconsin's been safely in almost the entire month, but obviously some recent losses. They've dropped to 70 with their own net. I try not to look at that too much. I do love the Badgers' road wins. Obviously, a road win at Marquette is super impressive. It just kind of gets better with age. The road win at Iowa still means a lot. That's a tournament team still. It gives them a unique element compared to the rest of the extreme bubble here, where most of the teams they're getting compared to don't have those types of road wins. So that's good for the Badgers. They're still 5-6 in their 11 opportunities against tournament caliber teams. That's pretty good. Most teams in this area are pretty well below 500. They're pretty much 500. Outside of that, Wisconsin's got some extreme metrics. So there's. I think they feel like a Dayton team. That's why I've got them there. Nevada, same boat, but different reasons. Nevada does have a winning road record, 6-5. Unfortunately for the Pack, none of those wins are against a team in the field today. The only thing hitting Q2 is a dominant road win at San Jose State, but they'll want to improve on that over time. They'll get their chances in the Mountain West. But they do have the wins at home against New Mexico and Boise State, which stand out. Utah State's an important win at home as well. And I think it's just enough. Nevada's other metrics are saying they should be in. I think that feels like Dayton to me. Arizona State's my 3rd to last team in, Jim. And at Arizona State, of course, losing an overtime wild one against my Washington Huskies last night. But that's fine. I mean, I think you look at the whole body of work always. And you look at Arizona State against all the combined quad breakdowns, which I have at least 6 or 7. They still have a winning record in all those areas. This is where your initial question, Jim, is actually a good one. So if I was the West Coast representative in the committee room, I would actually come and do a presentation on Arizona State. And I'd say, hey, Jim, winning at Colorado and winning at Oregon is not easy. Arizona State did both of those things. They've also, they've done well with the Creighton win. I know Kalkbrenner didn't play. I was actually at that game. So 7-3 away neutral record also stands out a ton against who they're being compared with. So Arizona State squeezes in. And last but not least, the hardest decision of all, I did go with Texas A&M as the last team in, obviously coming off the big win at Auburn. And this is kind of more like, again, if I'm representing Texas A&M in the room, they just ended the nation's longest home winning streak at Auburn. Auburn's a very difficult place to win. They did it in convincing fashion, but we're talking about the whole body of work. They do have the ugly loss to Wofford. They do have some middling, resume stuff that I'm not super happy about, but I compared them to Pitt, I compared them to Penn State, and I compared them to West Virginia, and I'm just slightly going with the Aggies today.
Makes sense. Hey, sorry for those fan bases. That might be a spoiler. You might not have made Rocco's field this week, but a lot of
Maybe
time
not.
to go. You mentioned Nevada getting in. We will close this show with games to watch over the weekend. On Monday, they said Nevada hosting New Mexico was a big one for the Wolfpack. They got it done. There they are in the field. Unsurprising. Lukas, what about you? Your last 4 teams in. I'm sure there'll be some crossover with Rocco here.
Actually, not too much crossover. I think our only crossover in the last 4 in is Wisconsin, who I have as my last team in the field, and I write with Rocco on why. But pretty similar overall. Nevada and Arizona State, who he had in his last 4 in, were my fifth and 6th last teams in, so right on the bubble there too. I think Missouri's kind of in a somewhat similar boat as Wisconsin in terms of really, really good resume metrics, but quality metrics that aren't quite there. They've had a good season overall against good teams. They're 5-5 in quads 1 and 2. 3 of their 5 losses on the year are quad 1A opponents. So really haven't taken any bad losses either. Kentucky, I still think is just kind of hanging around the bubble. Really solid metrics. A quad 4 loss, though, kind of plummets them. Only 1 win in quad 1 is in a tough spot. And I think West Virginia is a team that I have a really hard time putting in the field. I think the win over TCU is nice. A road win over Texas Tech, even a non-tournament Texas Tech team, is solid. Their metrics are good. Actually, their metrics are really good, but their wins just really aren't there yet to put them in the safe spot. I think that they're probably the team that I probably should have had as the last team in, the more I look at it as we get closer here. But they're 5-8 in quadrants 1, 2, and 3 combined this year. But they get a little bit of a boost with 4 of those wins being in quad 1. And they'll also have the advantage of such a friendly schedule for a bubble team coming down. Not in terms of winnable games, but the opportunities in the Big 12 are endless.
Yeah, no landmines in that league. You're not going to take a bad loss in the Big 12. It's
Yep.
essentially impossible. All right, we'll flip it over to first 4 teams out. And I know we kind of mentioned some of the names here, but we'll put them up on the screen here and actually discuss who and why is not in the field. Lukas, I'll go to you first. We'll kind of snake draft this one. Back to you and then over to Rocco. So what do you got for us, Mr. Harkins?
Yeah, so my first team out right now is Texas A&M, and I think Rocco hit on the negatives of them when he talked about them being in the field, and that's those middling losses. They've got a loss in quad 3 and a loss in quad 4 already this season. Pittsburgh's gotten a little bit closer to the field of late. Again, a quad 4 loss. I mean, honestly, this is something I brought up on Twitter either earlier this week or late last week. Well, we have a lot more quad 3 and quad 4 losses in tournament quality teams this year than in the past. But that's still a mark that hurts Pitt right now. Penn State doesn't really have the necessary top end wins. They're 3-7 in quads 1 and 2, pretty middling metrics in the 45 to 55 range across the board. And Oklahoma, I think, needs to just pile up some wins. And as I said with West Virginia, opportunities are going to be there to get there. So they're a team I'm gonna keep on my radar, along with an Ohio State. That are just like the opportunities are there to make moves.
What about you, Rocco? I know you said them, but let's get them up there and kind of reiterate your first 4 out.
Yeah, no problem. I'm laughing a little bit because Lukas took one of my points I wrote down about the bubble, just in terms of how many teams have Q4 losses. I'm used to seeing maybe
so many.
Yeah, I'm used to seeing maybe 2 to 4 around this time of year. I think there's maybe 9 or 10, maybe more, depending on how deep you want to go. But
real quick, can I say, does that make the lack of a Q4 loss actually a standout thing for some of these teams?
It helps a little because you're not like, I call it like a black eye, right? Like you don't have a black eye, you're clean. Now let's look at what the rest of what you got. Whereas if you're a team with some good wins and then you got the black eye, like Clemson's a great example. We're not going to talk about Clemson right now, but Clemson has 2 black eyes, but they're winning the ACC. So it's really difficult. How do you compare that against a clean team without as good a wins? It's a lot to consider. But that's what makes the process, important. So the last 4 in today, Jim, get back to your original question. It is West Virginia. And I'll say this, West Virginia, right now, today, they probably should be in the field. I'm looking at this kind of more holistically. I usually don't do this, but I do think with the grueling Big 12 and the amount of losses they're likely to take, I just think it's a being enough games over 500 situation. And I just think it's going to play out to where, a West Virginia, Oklahoma State, those types of teams are probably going to fall off. The net and all that, the metrics are perfectly there for West Virginia right this second. But I do not like the losing records and all the different quadrants. Obviously, they haven't played especially well in the last month. But again, that stuff is that as big of a deal as what they'll have to play going forward. Now, of course, if they beat Auburn this week, they're playing them in the SEC Challenge here tomorrow. They'll get a bunch of other opportunities that can quickly change. The Pittsburgh Panthers, a team that I know a lot of people do have in the field. I'm not as high just based on the fact that I think, they do have the 4 wins against the field. They're just all against kind of middling teams, NC State, Northwestern. The Virginia win is really nice, but it was at home. And I do think, you look at the Florida State home loss, Michigan loss right now looks pretty much like a sore thumb. I think it's a 2B loss today. I think Pittsburgh, if they just had a little bit more on the road, they're also just slipping further and further on both sides of the measurements. Try not to focus on that all the way, but they're high 50s in the resume metrics, mid 60s in the predictives. And I just think you look at that and it's just tough to put them in. And then after that, Penn State, they're a team I like a lot. I just think with that last loss, it tipped the scales a little bit. But don't worry, Nittany Lion fans, you have lots of time to fix that. I really like that team. And then Ohio State, we already talked about. Just too many losses right now, but again, plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, Ohio State's very, very tricky because they're sitting in the top 20 at Ken Palm, but you can't be 11-9, make the field. It's really, really tough to do. You got to have some standout stuff, and unfortunately, they don't.
They're
all right,
They're 5-8 in quadrants 1, 2, and 3 with a quad 4 loss. That is just tough.
Yeah, you can't really sugarcoat that in any way. All right, producer Dagan behind the scenes is going to give us our consensus last 4 in based on the work of all our bracketologists here, not just Rocco and Lukas, but also Brad and Andy Bottoms as well. So the consensus last 4 in right now: Kentucky, Wisconsin, Nevada, West Virginia, teams we've all broken down right now. We're going to dive in a little bit more on Kentucky coming up as we hit specific teams. So don't worry, Big Blue Nation, lots more to come on them. And now we'll flip the script the other side, the first 4 out for our consensus bracket. That would be Pitt, Texas A&M, Penn State, Ohio State. So a lot of agreement here, but that's, we've got 4 smart people looking at it. That's what happens when you guys all come together and put your big brains to work. All right, let's get into some of those team specific things I hinted at. And we're going to start with Missouri, a team that Lukas had in his last 4 in, one of the higher last 4 ins, the 4th team away from the cut line. But this was a team that was all over the field. And you can see, if you're watching on YouTube or Twitter, the Mizzou flag behind me. So I am particularly intrigued by the answers here on my Tigers. They are one of the teams that doesn't have a Q4 loss in that department. Rocco, we've heard a little bit from Lukas on Missouri so far. So I'll give you a first chance to speak on where the Tigers stand for you right now. And do you understand why people might be higher or lower on their resume?
I love how Missouri's the first team you picked, Jim. I don't know how you came up with that, but
I had to think about it long and hard about which team I wanted to talk about. But
I love it. No, I think Missouri's in a solid place to be selected. I don't see how they wouldn't be selected right now. Some of the upside stuff first is, you look at the 3 wins they have against the field. I think all of them have a lot of upside still because it's Illinois, Arkansas, Kentucky. Those are 3 teams that are, if you ask those fan bases, they're expecting a lot bigger things than what they've done so far this year. So if they turn it around in February, Kentucky's already showing signs, Arkansas maybe a little bit. We'll see what Illinois does. Those wins could just age like fine wine in Santa Rosa the next month and a half. So Missouri's got that work's already done. They don't have to go do anything. They've already got those. And then you look right now, they're 4-3 with the away neutral. Again, when you're in this 10-11 seed range, it's good to have a winning record in that area. Again, it's going to be also hard to maintain that. You got SEC road trips, and I don't care if you're playing teams in the field or not. Missouri travels a long way typically for their SEC games. It's not exactly in their Midwest footprint up there. So they've got great upside. They have a top 25 resume by the metrics as well. So those are all the good things Tiger-wise. The bad things are that, the metrics are starting to get upset with them. They're getting blown out too much. I think we're sitting today high 50s in the combined predictive metrics that show up on the selection committee's team sheet. So again, a lot of that stuff historically, and there's not much history. We've got like 3 tournaments with the net so far, can hurt your seed. So today I have Missouri at a 10 because of some of that, but I think they're safe to get in right now.
Lukas, how far would they jump with a win this weekend over Iowa State? Like how leveraged are they on that kind of a big game here?
I think we talked about this a little bit earlier with a different team. Just replace USC's name with Missouri. And kind of where I feel about them is like USC made a huge jump last night with a win over UCLA, and I think Missouri can do the similar thing against Iowa State tonight. I'm a little bit lower on Missouri than Rocco, but probably only by about 5 or 6 spots if he has him on the 10 line overall. And I look at just like they're 2-3 on the road, which I know you mentioned neutral. They're good on neutral sites this year, but they're 2-3 in road games. One of those wins was in overtime against a not very good Wichita State team. And their non-conference strength schedules hinging on 250 after playing their first 7 games all at home against teams outside the top 100.
Hopefully that Iowa State game amps that up. Even in a loss, it'll help the non-conference strength of schedule. So we'll see how that pans out.
Yep.
All right, we're going to stay in the SEC for the next team because we would be remiss to not discuss Kentucky, where they're at right now, right in that bubble territory for our consensus bracket. It feels like they're higher because of how well they played lately and that giant Tennessee win on the road. But that also tells you if they don't get that road win at Tennessee, they're not in the field right now. That's how precarious their position is. What do they need to do going forward, Lukas, to secure their spot in the field, let their metrics do a little more talking? Is it just like, do they need big wins or do they need quantity of wins? What's more important for Kentucky right now?
I think it's big wins for me. You mentioned the win over Tennessee, but it's their only win in quad 1. They're 1-5 in quad 1 games so far this year. They have a quad 4 loss to their name at home against South Carolina just before that Tennessee win. I think they're coming into a really crucial stretch here. 3 of the next 4 at home. Kansas being a huge one in the non-conference Big 12 SEC matchup. And then they get Florida and Arkansas coming back at home too in this run. And I think that, as Rocco already mentioned with Arkansas, they're a team that can make a lot of noise down the stretch, that can make a lot of teams that beat them feel really good about it. So that's a big opportunity at home because I think Arkansas is kind of that team that's always going to be in the back pocket for the SEC this year. They're 26th in the net, even though they haven't played particularly well. I think that's a group that a big win for Kentucky could come in that one. I think that they have to take care of these games, I think, at home as they play 3 of the next 4 after that away from home.
All right, Rocco, I don't think Kentucky came up in your last 4 in or first 4 out. So that tells me, they're at least a hair safer than those teams. What are you seeing with them that has them just above that Dayton cut line for you?
Well, I just like them a hair more than Wisconsin, so they're like the 5th team in. But
Okay.
But yeah, one of the things that actually very incremental, but they got a second win against the field because of the fact that I put A&M as my last team in, so I gave them 2 wins against the field. But they also picked up a road win over Vandy. Probably doesn't sound like much to the viewers, but it does start to add up in the bubble because I look really closely at what you've done in the first 2 quadrants on the road. And that's besides Tennessee, they didn't have anything. So that gives them a little something supplemental to add on. So it just made them a touch safer than Monday. But again, opportunity wise, they're going to get Kansas, Tennessee, Arkansas, Auburn all at Rupp. So you can imagine if they go 3-1 or 4-0 in those, they're going to shoot way up the board. They also get some road chances at Arkansas and at Florida. So I think for Kentucky as a whole, just no more South Carolina disasters and keep playing the way you're playing. I think the wins are just going to take they're good enough, and they've figured some things out with getting Severe Wheeler out of the lineup. I think they're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, certainly trending up. And if you stay on this trajectory, you won't be in this bubble discussion much longer. That's the key for Kentucky.
Winning streaks are never bad for bracketology.
That's true. It doesn't matter who you're beating. Let's stay one more. SEC, Rocco, you just mentioned them, so I'll go to you first. Auburn, they are a team that Kentucky has a chance against. They just got blown out at home against Texas A&M. You talked about the winning streak that's snapped there. I'm looking at my top secret data sheet here, and they haven't even played one of those elite games you talked about, the Quad 1A.
Right.
So are they in a position where they need one of those? How do you seed a team that hasn't even had the chance to show its mettle against that level of competition?
Yeah, it's a little trickier. It's almost like seeding a team from a league like the Mountain West or the American, because they also don't get those chances. So a lot of times, like you've mentioned earlier, a team like Houston's really hard to seed because they get like 3 home run opportunities a season, and then if they go 1-2 or 2-1, it's really difficult to seed them. Auburn's not going to be stuck in that situation. They're going into Tennessee in a week. They're going to West Virginia tomorrow. They're going to go to Kentucky and Alabama later this year. So their biggest games are in front of them. My overall thoughts on Auburn is they're kind of safely into the 6th seed zone right now, mainly because it's hard to argue. You know, they've played 16 games that matter. They're 12-4 in those games, 2-2 in the quad 1 area. A neutral court win over Northwestern shows that they can at least beat a tournament team. Outside of that, though, you don't really have a lot to bank on from a bracketology standpoint. I will say this: I did a breakdown the other night. All 4 of their losses, they got crushed by the opposing point guard. Where Tyrese Radford went off on them the other night. Check out the data on those. So I think they got to fix that problem. I know Wendell Green's a shorter guy, and they're having problems with a really good point guard on the other team. But beyond that, bracketology wise, the opportunities are there.
Yeah, Lucas, it's a solid but unspectacular profile. Would you agree with that? Is that where they land at the 6?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think 6 is about where they belong. That's where I have them too. I will say they have as many wins against my projected field, including Arkansas and Northwestern, as they do losses against teams that aren't in the field, which I don't love. I think they're a team that's very, very, very safely in the field right now, but is kind of one of those groups that, like, if they don't pick up those quality wins and chances, because their schedule down the stretch is tough. They get Tennessee and Bama both twice. And I think that those are games that, like, they probably need to take one of, or else they're, that's 4 losses. So I think that they're in a position right now that's extremely safe, but one that, like, they can either remain extremely safe over the next couple weeks, or it can really drop off in a hurry because they don't really have much to bank on through the first 2 months of the year.
Makes sense. All right, I'm going to hit you guys with a question each on 2 teams that played each other. That would be Virginia Tech and Charleston. I'm going to start, Lucas. I'll go to you with Virginia Tech. This is a team that's 12-8 right now. Whether they're in the field or not, or even close to the field, I guess is pretty debatable. They've struggled in ACC play, but they're maybe one of the most leveraged on an injury consideration teams in the country. 0-4 without Hunter Couture, but 12-4 with him in there. Some pretty solid wins when he plays. How are you currently evaluating Virginia Tech, and how much more does the sample as we go on with him playing matter to you in the future?
Yeah, I think that they're in my first 8, I think, teams out, or 8 to 12, somewhere in that range. They just don't really have the resume of a tournament team right now. They have 0 quad 1 wins. They're 6-8 in the first 3 quadrants. Their metrics aren't really there. And as it comes to the injury thing, I'm not going to give the committee a ton of credit in terms of really wagering that this year. I feel like they've really only referenced it when it comes to really big name injuries. And I'm not sure that Virginia Tech's Couture really qualifies as much as it should. I think it should make a big difference, but in terms of projecting what I think the committee will do, I think we saw with where VCU finished last year that there was very little discussion of Ace Baldwin missing time. And I think that, like, the players that we've seen referenced in terms of boosting a team's injury status, it's like Bonzi Colson was referenced, and I think this year we'll probably see Ryan Kalkbrenner get referenced in terms of Creighton's seeding, but I'm not sure Virginia Tech will get as much of a boost as it probably should.
That's why you're the best. Pulling the example from last year of Baldwin, like, it just echoes through, and we know that it's happened before. I will also say they lost to Boston College with Couture, so you can't really say, like, oh, they definitely win those games where he was out, because they lost to some bad competition without him. All right, Rocco, we went back and forth quickly about a week ago about Charleston, and I just want to ask you about seeding that team, because I think there's no question they're in. Lucas mentioned winning streaks are good for bracketology. They have the longest one in the country, so they're pretty comfortably in the field right now. But given where their predictive metrics are at, the chasm between that and their resume, how do you seed a team like that, Rocco?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little trickier. Obviously, if the seeding element has changed a little bit in the last 3 or 4 brackets that came out since the net era took off. And I think, if Charleston goes out and plays, the problem is they're in the Colonial with about 10, maybe 8 to 10 teams that are going to hurt them if they don't beat them by double digits. And so if they go beat Elon by 6 or Monmouth by 8, they're going to go from like 40th in net to maybe 50th. And it's kind of crazy, but that could hurt their seed in reality. Now, selection's different. So I do think if Charleston, especially at this point, only lost maybe one more game in league, one game in the CAA tournament, they're probably still in a decent position to get selected. Everything is favorable today. The problem is, even though they got the Kent State win, they got the Virginia Tech win, if both those teams are outside the bubble, which right now they are, they don't have a win against the field. And that could be one naysay. But typically, if you get up to like 29, 30 wins, even without a win against the field, the committee typically will find a way to get you in there. And that's what I was talking to you on Twitter about. So overall for the Cougars, I think they're in pretty good shape today.
Yep. It seems like it. It's just hard to imagine where they're at and the winning, the degree to which they've done it, them having any sort of risk on Selection Sunday, but we'll see. A lot of ways to go. They have the opposite of the Big 12 schedule where it's only landmines mostly for them going forward. All right, let's get to some chat questions. Producer Dagan tells me we've got some questions to hit. So we'll do that, and then we will close out with some games to watch over the weekend here. Dagan, what do you got for us?
Hello, Joe Schmidt wants to know, where do you see Illinois' ceiling in terms of seeding?
Jump in if you want to take it, guys. Whoever you got,
or both. It don't matter to me.
Yeah, I mean the Big Ten right now. It's a league where Purdue's out in front, right? You're looking at a 2-game lead in first, and so if Illinois gets hot, they're 14-6 today. They've got some good wins, and then you get a bunch of road opportunities. They're going to Wisconsin, Iowa, Penn State, Indiana, Ohio State, and Purdue. Those are their last 6 road games, fellas. So you're talking about an Illinois team that can, if they go 4-2 or better in those 6 road games, even if they drop a home game, that means a lot for how far up the board they go in terms of the seed list. So I think a lot of opportunities still in front of them. In that league, it's an elite league. You have a ton of chances to show, by getting hot late, where you belong in the bracket. So I think they can do that.
Lukas, anything to add, or is that perfect? We can get more thoughts or move to the next question.
Yeah, I think with the Big Ten right now, it just kind of feels like there's Purdue at the top, and then there's 1 or 2 teams every time I update my bracket that are in contention for the 4 to 6 seed line. Right now, that's been Rutgers and Indiana for me. I have Illinois on the 6, and I think that's probably, I could see Illinois getting to a 4. That's probably my really hypothetical ceiling. But the thing I'll reference, they got 3 games left against teams that I have ahead of them right now in the field, with Rutgers, Indiana, and Purdue. And those are opportunities. Those are huge leverage opportunities. They won't pass Purdue, but I mean, a win against Purdue does a lot of good things for a resume. So I think that they have those kind of huge leverage opportunities to make a difference.
All right, what's next, Dagan?
Tony Snyder, thoughts on Iowa and where they stand?
Staying in the Big Ten. Love it. Lukas, what do you think of the Hawkeyes? I guess they've had Chris Murray out of the lineup, now Patrick McCaffrey out of the lineup. Probably a tough team to evaluate too, right?
Yeah, I think Iowa's just one of those teams that needs wins. I think their quality wins are there. They have 4 quad 1 wins, 2 of which are quad 1A. Their metrics are all there. They're top 37 in all 3 quality metrics. It's just kind of a chance for them. They just need to get the wins, which is not an easy thing when you look at the rest of their Big Ten schedule. Minnesota's probably is the only team outside of the KenPom top 75 that they play the rest of the year, except Nebraska at home. And that Minnesota game's in the road. Like they're going to have to get the wins, the quantity. And I think that this next 3-game stretch, Rutgers at home, Northwestern at home, Illinois at home, they need to take advantage.
Exactly. 12-8 overall, 4-5 in the Big Ten, 12 games to go. And you got to play, of course, at least one Big Ten tournament game. So they need at least 7 more wins. And that's what happens in leagues like the Big Ten, SEC, and Big 12, just those 3, because you get too close to 500, they're not going to select you. You got to be at least 2 games over. And then if you're doing the math on that, you got to think you're going to lose in your conference tournament. So you got to account for that as well. So the magic number, I think, for Iowa is at least 7 and perhaps 8, depending on who they win and who they lose to.
And the other thing I'll add with that is having 4 quad 1 wins already. They're a team that if they just win all 3 home games coming up, they're going to shoot up seed lists pretty quickly.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. What else? Anything else, Dagan?
Might as well stay in the Big Ten. Why not? How many teams do you think the Big Ten can realistically get in?
Yeah, what's a max? That's always tricky because you're trying to figure out who beats who and that kind of thing. But given the way it's projected, if you have 11 teams finish 9-11 or better in the league, What do you think, Lucas? What's the ceiling for this conference?
I think the ceiling is 9. I think they get 8. Is my thought. I think, and I think I've realized that kind of as we've gotten these last few games, the last few days at least. Like Wisconsin's hung on as my last team in the field right now, but like just the other night, it's like, okay, Wisconsin loses to Maryland. Maryland moves up. Wisconsin moves very close to the bubble. And they had the same thing happen with a Penn State game relatively recently. It just kind of feels like there's a lot of teams hovering in that area where, like, if they don't have to play each other, great, but they're gonna have to play each other.
Yep, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm close. I'm close to Lucas there. I would say 3 on each side could still either play their way in or play their way out, maybe even more on the inside. So that's a really good answer by Lucas. I would just say I don't really fully trust Northwestern still. I don't know why. Maybe it's just history. But ideally, if they keep playing the way they are, they're going to be fine. They'll be in. And then you have Maryland, who's kind of teetering. Obviously, Wisconsin's last 4 in today. And then on the outside, Penn State, Ohio State, and maybe even Michigan could certainly play themselves back in. Today we have 9 in, I believe. So it could, in fact, it could just land right there at 9. I feel like we're at a good number today.
And I think that the Big Ten has a couple teams that are just like not good for the conference in terms of what could potentially happen. Like that's Ohio State sitting on the outside right now, and they're a Ken Pom top 20 team. And if they stay on the bubble, they're going to be a pretty tough out for a lot of teams that are on the cut line.
Yep. Yeah, if they stay 4 games under 500 against the top 2 quadrants, but they beat a couple other bubble teams, it's not great.
Yeah.
The old eating itself analogy, as they say.
Although I'm sure the Buckeye fans would prefer to just win those games and get in themselves.
Yeah, certainly. All right, Dagan, maybe one more question, and then we'll close out with games to watch.
We'll do one more here. St. Mary's, where do you guys have them, and what do you think their ceiling can be?
I have on the 5, and I don't know how high they can necessarily get. Like, I don't think their metrics are going to get any better than they are right now. They're incredible. Like they're 6th in the net. They're top 15 in BPI, Ken Pom, Sagarin, and KPI. I can't imagine their metrics get any better, and I think that's the big bonus for teams that don't have as many quality win opportunities, is to have really good metrics. And I don't think theirs can get any better than they are. I think it's a 4 or 5 seed ceiling.
Rocco, what if they triple sweep Gonzaga?
They triple sweep Gonzaga, I think they probably get up to a 3. I think I was going to say if they get 2 out of 3 against Gonzaga, that's their formula to get to a 4, which is a very specific part of the bracket, protected seeds, right? So, and that has double meaning. For the bracket itself, it means you can't play a 13 seed that's within 75 miles of the arena. So it's an important distinction. So I think they can get protected seed with 2 of those wins. And with 3, who knows? I mean, you still have to remember they lost to Colorado State at home. They lost to New Mexico at home. It's not a perfect resume by any means. They lost to UW in the Wooden. So it's they're playing amazingly well. They're on fire. I love them. They're local, but we got to be realistic about it.
Yeah, they're one of those teams.
Yeah, I love this team too.
Yeah,
they're a blast
to watch. Yeah, they're like Ohio State and Creighton. These ones with the huge gap between resume metrics and quality metrics that just become kind of dicey, tricky to seed. A discussion maybe we'll get into the next time I host, because I have questions about it. But today we will wrap up here with some games to watch over the weekend. Like I said, they mentioned Nevada, New Mexico as one to watch, and that had a huge impact on our bubble situation this week. Lucas, what are some ones you're looking at on Saturday and Sunday? And even if there's one tonight that you're intrigued by?
Yeah, I think going into tomorrow, one of the things I'm looking at is the Ohio State at Indiana game. I think Ohio State has the quality metrics that really back up them being a better team than their resume is. And I think if you're a Buckeye fan, it's about time to show it, kind of time. So I think that they can go and get an opportunity at Indiana is a big one. It's also a statement opportunity for Indiana to prove that like this recent stretch of play is for real, and that they're going to be in that competition for, as Rocco references, as a protected seed kind of conversation. So that's one of the games that I'm really looking forward to tomorrow.
Rocco, anything that a couple, maybe we'll give you 1 or 2 or 3. What really jumps out to you here?
Well, I've got to just give a quick shout out to my friends down in Florida. Obviously trying to play their way back into the picture right now, but they have an enormous opportunity going to Kansas State. Kansas State's been an unbelievable story. I think we're all on board the Tang Coach of the Year train. But if Florida somehow gets that win, I think it changes a lot of things for them from a non-conference standpoint. The Big 12 SEC Challenge just presents that last nail in the coffin for all the non-conference metrics. And that's a real big opportunity for Florida to do something. Not saying they're favored to win or anything, but if they go get it, they've been playing well lately. It is conceivable. So I'll throw that one out there. I do think all the teams in our mix of first four out, last four in are pretty much in big games. Arizona State and Nevada have tricky road games against non-tournament teams. Ohio State at Indiana. Obviously, if the Buckeyes get that, we have to do a whole clean look at Ohio State again, like we did with USC last night. So definitely watch that game.
Florida's a fun one to mention because I know the Big 12 is a gauntlet, but it's tough to find a harder 4-game stretch than what they have right now. At Kansas State, Tennessee at home, at Kentucky, at Alabama. That is a gauntlet for the Gators there. Lucas, one more thing to add?
Yeah, if I would add another couple in here, I think that, like we've mentioned, Creighton and Arkansas as two of those teams that have pretty big gaps between their quality and resume metrics. Both have big opportunities to kind of even those out. Creighton gets Xavier at home, Arkansas goes at Baylor. And then the kind of the moving day game of Saturday to me is NC State at Wake Forest. Wake Forest is kind of on the outside looking in right now, but a team that could be in threaten rope. That could be could threaten for a bid. And I think if they get a home opportunity against an NC State team that is currently in the field for me.
Unsurprisingly, a ton of huge games when there's 148 of them on Saturday. Long ways to go, still a month and a half, like 45 days until Selection Sunday. We will be with you
Siena tonight.
That's right. Huge one in the MAC, Metro Atlantic. We'll be with you all the way up until Selection Sunday, Mondays and Fridays, 5 p.m. Eastern. You will get the full bracket from our consensus bracketologist here coming out after the show. So keep an eye on the Field of 68's Twitter page, and you'll get to catch that there. We will be back on Monday, breaking down all the action that happened over the weekend, how it impacted the 1 seeds, the bubble, some of our specific team questions. So we will see you all then. Appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you for the questions. We'd love to have a little interaction at the end there. For Rocco, for Lucas, I'm Jim Root. See you.